What's going on, guys? It's Frito here. The Overwatch 2 developers didn't ask me anything on a few subjects, but mostly perks. Some of the questions and responses are quite long-winded, so what I'm going to do for you guys is summarize it, let you know the key takeaways and what to expect coming up next, as well as add my insight where it applies. They get asked what are the design goal of perks. Now, they'll expand on this later because it may change in the future, but for now, it's to increase things for your heroes to do, increasing situational viability, and giving more agency over your in-match experience. Alex says for viability, that can come through shoring up weaknesses against certain heroes, or it can come by adding more mobility so certain heroes could be played on more maps. That goal led to perks like Junkrat's Frag Cannon, Sigma's Levitation, and many more. So that's one of the three. The other two was just new things to do or more agency over your in-match experience. He rephrases it in the last section saying for Sombra's White Hat, that is fulfilling a particular hero fantasy that many players wanted us to lean on. And we think that's an interesting opportunity the perk system can create. He says over time, we'll see how players respond to some of the more off-the-wall ones. The devs get asked about perks with drawbacks because they kind of suck, as a general rule. Either not as competitive or just kind of not fun. Scott Kennedy, of course, Custa, who was in the Overwatch League both as a player and an analyst, he's now on the hero designer team, and it seems like influenced some of the perk strategy, which is probably why it came out pretty decent. He explains that when they were first designing the perks, they actually had more that had a drawback, but it was found that in some situations it would feel worse to play a perk, even if the benefit was strong. And I tend to agree with this, even with the ones that are still included. So that used to be more of the perks, and they went back on that. One he highlights here is Sombra's major perk, Stack Overflow, which makes Hack more potent, but requires you to use it at a closer range. He says, we've received a lot of feedback that this perk doesn't feel good to use or play against, so they're planning on making balance changes to help and potentially replace it. And they want to avoid situations like this in the future. And importantly, in the instances where we do have a perk that has a drawback, we want to ensure that the other perk option doesn't also have a drawback, so that there's always a beneficial option. The devs are asked about putting any of the perks into the base kit, which I've heard is how they implement World of Warcraft sometimes and develop it over time. Custa says there's no plan on doing that currently, but perhaps we'll think about that over time. He cites Bastion as an example here because I think his perks wouldn't really make sense if you put it all into the kit at once, right? You have a lot of interesting choices with the Bastion perks to either make his ultimate more dynamic, have more mobility for himself, or add some self-repair for survivability. And he does note that a resource limitation is coming in a mid-season patch. He says these perks have made the hero better overall, but much more fun to play. These were some of the major goals perks were trying to accomplish, but I can see us taking some parts of the perks and putting them into the base kits as heroes change in the future. When asked about any silly perks that they scrapped in development, Alec Dawson brings up ones for Torbjorn, a movement perk. It only lasted a playtest or two, but Torbjorn could launch himself off of his turret by double jumping on it. And the idea was that if you had the sticky turret, you could change the angle of that leap and catapult yourself into the backlines. He says maybe that we'll come back to that one day. It was certainly silly. I think in conjunction with that, you need some sort of hammer upgrade as well, maybe with a dash to close the distance and a parry button that gives him a self shield with overhealth. Man, I'm just designing Iron Fist. What am I doing? Okay, when asked about the developer's favorite perks, Custa says his favorite one is Craftsman, the Torb one where you can chase your Reinhardt to give him armor as you're repairing him. Yeah, good luck with that one, bud. He also lists the Pharah Mini Grav or the Zarya Rocket Jump. The devs are asked about overperforming heroes since the perk's implementation. Alex cites Ana, Bastion, Pharah, Ramattra, and Winston. And interestingly, cites the individualistic aggressive perks for Ram, Mauga, and Zarya, the ones that are all damage focused, and then Soldier's agility training, which lets him sprint faster. That makes sense. That's a huge survivability buff. But as far as balance goes, he goes to explain that he wants to look more closely at the minor and major perk combination, what rank thresholds players are using them at, and how quickly a hero is gaining their perks, because that might be a way that they adjust it as well. Ultimate charge rate matters a lot, so perk charge rate might as well. He cites some changes coming both in the short term as well as Season 16. This will be mentioned in a few of the responses coming up. In the short term, expect balancing to the weaker perks to make them more competitive. Some core kit tuning alongside that, which might mean like a nerf to a hero that has a great perk. And then also a meaningful amount of change they want to inject into the system throughout the next few patches. But that might just be the charge rate of perks and when they come online, things like that. He says tuning to the perks and actual perk swaps, hoping for some in 16, which I assume is season 16, are included in that. And I believe he means swapping out some perks for some newer perks, which he mentions a bit later. When asked about the perk pick rates, Custa explains that where there's lopsided pick rates so far, it's due to the other option not being enticing. He says, for example, Roadhog's minor hog toss isn't picked very often compared to scrap hook, and Ramattra's void surge, which allows you to deal more damage with your staff, is much more preferred over the simpler defensive option prolonged barrier, which is 25% longer duration on your barrier. I think a bit of oversight with the Roadhog hog toss is that the benefit of the trap going into the enemy's backline is a downgrade to his playstyle because that's his inherent combo. So it would have needed an extra bit of oomph to all of a sudden want you to change your big multi-combo, which was the whole basis of the trap being invented to begin with, to split up the damage sources so that you had to have multiple steps in order to create that same one-shot kill effect. Well, playing the trap far from you just doesn't quite do anything. So it'd have to do like a status effect or extra damage or something like that. And they do mention a buff to it later. Scott goes on that there is a balance pass coming season 15 in the mid-season, and they'll be swapping underperforming perks out entirely in season 16. Don't expect radical changes, but they want to make sure it feels good to use for all heroes. Some perks that they're keeping an eye on are Tracer's major perk, Flashback. Zarya's major perk that allows her to rocket jump very high is very strong on some maps, but its pick rate varies dramatically depending on the rank. I think that's a skill set the Zarya players will develop over time. He finishes by saying the goal is to make every set of minor and major perks feel like there's a choice to be made depending on your playstyle, the map, or how the match is going. If a perk feels like it's always the right choice or the wrong choice, then we want to make changes. My opinion on the perk system changed when I grinded the mode and I realized that many of them were not the major disadvantage I thought they might be, especially this one in question, right? I have a pretty slow playstyle, so while Zarya having mobility to rocket jump around the map surely allows you to take over the game more as a skilled player, I personally just like more damage on my graph and anchoring and playing slower. I tend to know that it is probably worse, but I don't feel at a massive disadvantage for having the other one. Because again, if you don't like to rocket jump, it's just not even a perk to you. But if you can rocket jump, well, that means you can probably go off and duel a lot of squishy characters that used to be able to get away from you. Now they can't. So not to mention just the map geometry, just the target selection alone of being able to rocket jump and close the distance on things or escape in positions you wouldn't have survived in previously. That's massive on a character like Zarya, who just gets overcooked damage all the time. The devs are asked if they're going to be adding more skill expressive type perks down the line, specifically for a character like Mercy, because how do you balance perks on Mercy up against a character like Tracer, who gets more blinks, which is the entire skill set of the FPS hero blinking around everywhere? Custa clarifies in saying this first round of perks was to enhance or change the way you play your hero, which I think is the case. It either makes your hero better at what they already did or allow you to do a new thing. He says in the future, we could implement more transformative perks that would add skill expression or change the style in which you would currently play a hero. I think the only one that's like that, I would say, is Sombra, who can change from being a backline assassin to being able to heal her team. Custa clarifies that he wouldn't say that the perks have a seasonal theme in which they were designed to be played a hero a certain way, but they've learned a lot about what perks are the most interesting and fun, while also seeing the impact that they can have on a hero's win rate and play rate. They were asked how the perk system has affected counter picking, and so far in ranked, they've seen 25% less hero swaps. He clarifies the concept of power spikes in this response. The questioner, I think, doesn't know what power spikes mean. They asked if the perk system would limit power spikes, and Custa correctly points out that actually this increases the number of power spikes because it's as if you have a couple more ultimates throughout a round. almost. It's like working up to your perk is another power spike where you gain a new enhancement. So Custa said, we think a number of our heroes needed bigger moments than they had previously. I agree with this completely, and I like the perk system so much more than I originally thought I would, mainly due to the cadence of how you gain the power. Working up to it like an ultimate and then dynamically choosing in the moment feels clutch and allows the match to have texture because you don't have the powers to begin with, but then you and they get powers around a similar time. So you're actively making the counter pick in your strategy with your hero as opposed to needing to hold the H key to do a similar thing, which is what Aaron Keller had talked about when he kind of was teasing this system last year. It's the same skill set as counterpicking in a way, or you could, if you don't have to counterpick necessarily, you could just invest in your playstyle. The point is you have more agency to go through the match with the perk system. It's pretty awesome, especially considering how simplistic it actually is and how much better I think it can get as they refine it over time. Kenny Hudson has the juice. They're going to rotate in some perks in Season 16, but before that, they've got a bunch of balance changes and tweaks in the Season 15 mid-cycle patch. Hog Toss will now increase the damage of Pigpen. Juno's double jump reset perk is going to get an increase to the duration of glide boost, and they'll be nerfing Bastion self-repair by giving it a resource meter. Now, when he's asked about there being more levels to the perk system as opposed to just 3, he says they tried it from 2 levels up through 4. And even one where you eventually had all minor and major perks. 3 levels has been the sweet spot for a while, but that's not to say the system can't evolve. Still a bit early, but it's a system that can evolve if need be. Some considerations that we might not all think about intuitively, but match length matters in that. So if there's going to be, let's say, 4 levels, you have to think, is a player even going to get through all 4 of the levels in an entire round? Or how long should they have to wait to get up to the max level? That's important because certain maps and game modes go longer, whereas a hybrid can be over with a full hold in 4 minutes. I like the system they have now. However, I feel like too many of the characters have too many natural passives built into them over time that at the very least, I'd like them to add a perk 0 right out of spawn. Alec Dawson says that by Season 18, the goal will be that then every hero will get at least 1 new perk, but somewhere between 25 and 50% of the perks will be changing, some being completely and some receiving significant tuning. If we have perks that players really love, we don't want to immediately remove those, and the refresh would then be looking at perks that are more middling in interest. He says we'd also like to evaluate how the perk system functions overall at that point too. That could include changes to the catch-up mechanics, gain rates, or even a starting level choice. But those are still fairly early discussions. When asked about, would you be able to change your perks mid-game ever? Custa says they wanted your allies and enemies to understand what to expect on that hero for the match. And while yes, you might pick a perk accidentally and want to swap it, that's something they're looking at. I won't say that it'll never be an option to swap your hero's perks in the future, but there are no current plans on changing perks mid-game. He says, we want it to feel like you're making a meaningful choice when you select your perk. And I tend to like this philosophy. While misclicking is bad, I don't like the idea of you not knowing whether the Torb's turret is going to flank or upgrade. Just pick one, because fluidly switching the perks turns the game into counter watch again, because you'll want to be actively changing them all the time. If the enemy respecs, you gotta respec. Like, no. Part of the big benefit to the gameplay of this right now is that there is texture between the characters. They're not all equal all of the time. Some are better at different phases. The neutral, perk 1, perk 2, and ultimate. That's a lot of variability between all of that execution. The devs are asked about mystery heroes because currently the perk system works as a win more mechanic. If your characters stay alive, they get their perks. Now, Alex says they have a fix for this coming up, but I'm not so sure it is. He says you'll get 2 random perks, 1 minor and 1 major each time you spawn, which I think makes the respawning player weaker, but it also means just spawning from the start. You might have bad perks and want to reset anyway, similar to being on like a hero you're not good on. Either way, Mystery Heroes is pretty random regardless. I think what this player's talking about though is like the team that is alive to gain their perks will be stronger than the team that just died, losing their perks, now getting random ones. So I don't know how they fix this necessarily, because each time you die, you're getting a new hero. Whereas in the normal game, you die on your hero, you're still on that same hero, you're leveling up that hero. That's the way the system works right now. Like you can swap from hero to hero, and I don't know if you guys know this, but if you swap back to the hero you leveled up, the level progress is still there. you level up Torb and swap to Pharah, you can go back to Torb and he'll keep that experience. It doesn't transfer, which is an important distinction, but this is why it doesn't work properly in Mr. Heroes right now, because each time you die, you swap. So I think they have to think about this a little bit more for that Mystery Heroes player base. The devs are asked about pre-selecting perks. Kenny Hudson explains that they did think about it as an interface and loadout in the hero gallery, which would be even further from the select a hero, I believe. He explains that being locked into a choice made prior to really being 100% on what you would want to choose felt like a worse option than always giving yourself options. That's not to say this couldn't change as people get used to the choices and the playstyles with perks become a bit more cemented though. I see what he's saying, and while I like the idea of a perk 0 just to sort of take some of the power creep out of the kit itself and put it into the perks, the point is you don't know which perk you really want until you start fighting the enemy and know what they have, know what your team has, what is the actual matchup, and then leveling up into that first and second perk feels good because you're making those decisions based on the data you have, as opposed to just blindly doing it. But that's why I would want the perk 0s to be more of like the non-interactive perks and more of the, let's say, stat bonuses or playstyle distinctions. What he describes here, having a preset loadout in the hero gallery, that's kind of like what Call of Duty does, where you have a create a class and you can't swap your perks mid-game, you sort of take them as a bundle. I'm glad they didn't go with that for Overwatch because this more RPG style mechanic works better, I think. Kenny Hudson announced that Ramattra is going to be getting a dance emote, Shake Your Omnic Tail Feather. When asked about which primary weapon archetype that they haven't used yet, Kenny Hudson says the one that always comes up in their what's next discussion is a flamethrower. We'd love to get one in, but it's got to be epic. And so many characters and so much FPS homage already in the game, they're kind of running out of options. Mei has a freeze thrower. Mauga's gun set you on fire, but seems like we'll be getting a flamethrower down the line at some point. And for you Clash aficionados out there, Alec Dawson agrees Clash is awesome when it all comes together. We actually spent a good amount of time on Clash's scoring before we made the decision to pull it from competitive. Even with scoring changes, we believe the mode needed some fundamental geo changes to points A and E to perform better as a competitive mode. Currently, we are experimenting with building another Clash map from the ground up with a different approach to the layout to see if it solves some of the core issues to the mode. That's all very early, but hopefully we get some significant geo changes along with scoring changes that can get Clash into a great spot. I think Clash is a load of fun, and maybe that's just because I play Junkrat and it's usually a close range map, but I don't even mind that it's kind of random and wacky. I have a controversial suggestion for Clash, okay? What if when you're capping on your side of the map, it's worth half a point? Does that solve it? Because I feel the BS part of Clash is that the game grinds on and it can go, you cap mid, struggle to push into their side, they cap theirs. Then back and forth for a while, and before you know it, you're like tied for no reason, or similar things happen like that, snowballing against their spawn advantage on A or E in a similar way. I think just defending your home flag should not be worth the same as attacking neutral or aggressively. That would inherently make it more worth taking the risk of fighting on their side, which currently it's just a trap to do so. So the mode doesn't play well because it means if you get baited into attacking, it's usually a mistake. The maps themselves though, like the geo it has, regardless of the scoring of the game, I think is so fun though. I don't care if it's less tactical, just want more explosions. Okay guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. How are you guys feeling about the perk system? We've had a while to play it now. Has your experience changed over time? Have you grown on it like I have? Let me know your thoughts. I've been Frito. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to actually get notified when my videos come out. That's been it for me. I'll see you guys next time.